Welcome to the Capital City Crew podcast. Join your hosts Jeff, Owen, Josh, and Herman as they dive deep into the game of Malifaux. Explore sophisticated strategies and creative combinations, but always remember in Malifaux, bad things happen.
All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another exciting episode of the Capital City Crew podcast. We are coming here today with a lot of exciting things. We have a special guest who I'll get to in a second. But first off, I just want to remind everyone that we do have a Patreon that helps pay for the show. It's not free to produce podcasts and get all the software for this. So help us out, support your Capital City Crew, and check us out in the show notes. So what we're going to talk about today is actually a continuation of our hot takes episode. There was one spicy take that we got in our Facebook post that we thought was spicy enough to warrant its own episode. So this hot take came to us from the UK's Jamie Varney. He had this take. As it currently stands, the factions would be better balanced if generic upgrades were removed from the game. That is quite a take. And with us here in studio to talk about that take and upgrades in general is Jamie Varney, member of the Flippin' Weirds podcast group out of the UK, frequent guest on the Third Floor Wars, and recently the representative of Explorer Society in the UK Super League. We're also told that Jamie is the self-styled Pantomime Villain, which is a British term of some sort. So, Jamie, welcome to the show. And what does that mean?
Yeah, hi. Thanks for having me. So, Pantomime Villain's just like your over-the-top villain, like your moustache-twirling sort of Bond villain type person, and that's like the role that I fill in the UK community, or the one they like to tell me I fill anyway.
Well, we're really excited to have you here, and can't wait to get into the upgrade discussion. But before we do, we're going to jump to the segment that we like to start things off with, which is our 10-minute tech talk. So with us this week with the tech talk is Jeff. Jeff, you want to tell us what is your tech pick and what crazy jank does it do?
So I'm with us every week, unfortunately to some of our listeners, but my 10-minute tech talk is actually going to be about Calypso of the Explorer Society. And the reason why I like Calypso, and he actually works really well in general with Explorer Society, and a lot of people don't notice this on first glance, but for 12 soul stones, you can get both Dr. Beeb and Calypso. And Dr. Beeb can, in the first activation, he pulls in 2 cards from your discard pile of 5 or less. Hopefully one of those is a tome. He can make himself a scrap marker, then eject himself out of Calypso and do whatever other action that you want. And from that point on, anybody else that is size 2 or lower can pilot Calypso, which means if you have some runaways that you're not really doing anything with, they can jump inside Calypso, and Calypso can get 2 AP and 2 bonus actions in a turn using that. You can also place models that are very easy to kill, or models that you want to get up the board faster, say a Shambling Nest that's only move 3, while inside Calypso it becomes move 4 and can do a bonus action to make itself walk again while they don't have a bonus action. You can also put, as I mentioned, the eyes and ears. You can stick those inside there to get the eyes and ears up the board, and when Calypso dies, he explodes, and that eyes and ears is in a perfect location to allow the eyes and ears to die and pulse out the defense duels or get a parasite token. So not to forget about what are the little 4 soulstone minions that
Hopeful prospects.
The hopeful prospects can also pilot Calypso. So it's a great way of, you don't even need to bring Dr. Beeb, but once Calypso dies, you can resummon Calypso with Dr. Beeb very easily. And it's just a nice little tech pick. What are your guys' thoughts on it?
It sounds really janky, but I've had to deal with it, and it is so annoying. It is so annoying because then he's this armor 2 thing. It's in your face. You're not expecting it because it's out of keyword. And then once you kill it, it comes back. I was ready to strangle Jeff.
It blows up and then comes back. It's great. You run it up in the middle of their crew. You can pulse damage. You can pulse more damage. And then bring it back for another round of damage and then more damage.
I think by far my favorite part was spectating Jeff and Josh playing when they both did it. And they just had this weird, stupid Calypso slugfest going on in the center for the entire game.
It's
Wait,
true.
you both had Calypso fighting another Calypso?
Yeah, it was Anya with Calypso versus Cooper with Calypso. And I will say the Anya Calypso came out to be the superior Calypso.
Well, makes sense. So there you go. And Jamie, you can try out that Calypso tech in your next Explorers game.
Yeah, it's quite interesting. I'm always a little tempted to take Calypso just because there is some cool combos of putting stuff inside. I literally just, as you said that, I was just like, oh, you could put a Hopeful Prospect in, and then it could kill something using Calypso. And then I thought, actually, that doesn't work because it can't replace while it's inside Calypso. But yeah, no, it is cool. I hadn't even thought about some of the things you could do with Calypso. I'm super trying to stay in theme at the moment as much as I can with them, just to learn the different mechanics and how it all interacts together. But Calypso is a super tempting app keyword to pick just for some of the cool things you can do.
Well, I think it's great for a faction to have a model that, I mean, despite Herman calling it super annoying and jank, like, it opens up interesting combos. And it doesn't sound like it's like completely busted. So like, I feel like that's a good spot to be at where there's something that's neat and somewhat unexpected that can create interesting combinations of unexpected keyword synergies. So that's really cool that made it in.
Yeah, I particularly like being able to the shambling nests are very slow. Now, granted, they have from the shadows, but you're typically going to want to leave one back a little bit so that Cadmus Nexus can use it as a point to pull other models forward. Well, that one can be put inside Calypso and moved up the board. I mean, just in its move alone, the Shambling Nest can move 12 inches, where normally the Shambling Nest can only move 6. So you're doubling the Shambling Nest's movement at that point.
People are going to love to hear that. Getting their Shambling Nests up in your face sooner.
What
could go wrong?
Maybe we shouldn't have shared this tech. That
Yes.
sounds bad.
So I will, because I don't want this to be running rampant and people to jump to conclusions like what's been happening on the boards and things like that with Explorer Society. Dr. Beebe is the only person that can take his own actions from inside Calypso. So the Shambling Nest cannot give you parasite tokens from within Calypso. It can only use Calypso's actions, which is a 2/3/4 damage flip. So just keep that in mind. Although all those neat scheme are terrain markers that are put out by a whole bunch of masters at this point, it's a good counter pick to that because he does have the Thriller Driller. So interesting little piece.
All right. Well, there you have it, folks. Try it out in your next game. Let us know on our Facebook post about how it worked out for you. So we're going to jump to a quick break, and when we get back, we're going to get into the meat of our main topic, which is the spicy hot take about upgrades and how upgrades work. So stick with us, and we'll be right back.
Hello. Do you like our podcast and want to ensure that it continues to run? Maybe you want to hear our outtakes and unedited footage. Or perhaps you're just flush with cash and you like being generous. Either way, we've set up a Patreon just for you. If you like us, please consider donating. Our Patreon can be located in the show notes. If not, we're all pretty sure that it's Herman's fault. Either way, if you like our show, go ahead and leave us a comment. Thanks.
And welcome back, everyone. So today, our main topic is talking about upgrades in Malifaux 3rd Edition. So I figured, since the take here that spawned this whole episode is Jamie's, Jamie, why don't you walk us through what your thought process was around the balance of upgrades in 3rd Edition today?
Yeah, no problem. So, I mean, overall, I think it's important to say, I think Malifaux is really, really well balanced as a game, especially compared to most other games out there. But as I was looking for something to put for like a spicy take, and generally, this is what I think. And I think it's important to clarify when I say the game would be better balanced without the upgrades in it. I mean, in their current state as they are at the moment, the game would be better balanced. And by that, I mean that there is such a wide range of, let's say, power level among the upgrades that differs so wildly between the factions that I think on their own, the upgrades, whilst being quite cool for the game, cause a fair bit of imbalance.
That makes sense. So let's dig into that, right? So we have upgrades. The same pattern in this edition was let's give every faction 3 faction-specific versatile upgrades that cost 2 stones. Also, there's the global upgrade of make your effigy grow into an emissary, which I think we should touch on, but maybe we'll touch on that at the end. But not all factions are created equal in this new format. I know near the top of the list, I would guess, is what? Arcanists as most problematic?
Yeah, for sure. They're definitely one of the top.
Josh?
Yeah, Arcanists, Ten Thunders, Bayou, probably the top 3 of the ones with problematic upgrades, and a couple others Lording in the middle, and at the bottom we have like Outcasts and Neverborn. I don't know what other people think about the bottom of that.
I mean, as the Outcast player, I will definitely say I find our upgrades fairly lackluster. I don't think I have ever taken Wanted Criminal. I've taken Servant for Dark Powers occasionally in Levy, sometimes on the Vix. And then while getting hard to kill on an upgrade sounds really cool, it's 2 stones. Like, that's a lot to spend for what it does.
Well, I think that the caveat there is it's not just for the Outcast upgrade. It's not just 2 stones to give hard to kill. It's 2 stones to give hard to kill to a living model. So, like, some of those models that you would want to have hard to kill on, like Ashes and Dust, it'd be great to, keep them alive a little bit longer or something like that. They can't take them. So it is a limiting factor.
Yeah, I don't know. Herman, what do you think? Either as my opponent in Outcasts or for your beloved guild?
I was actually going to speak up for Neverborn and say that I think that the Neverborn upgrades are basically right where they should be. I've found use for all 3 of them. I mean, and it's fairly specific, fairly niche, but there are multiple interactions for all 3 of them that you do take, and no one seems to be complaining about them because you all already tried to rank them lowest. So maybe that's kind of the launching point for Jamie's Caliente takes.
Yeah, ultimately, the thing is, I think you're probably right. Neverborn probably have one of the most balanced sets of upgrades. But ultimately, none of them would be a problem if they were all balanced at the same place. And like what you were saying about Outcasts, so actually their upgrades are quite uniquely in a different place in that they potentially all 3 are really, really good, but only on certain models in the faction, which means you see them a lot on those models, like Soldier for Hire on Midnight Stalker, for example, is just one you see a lot. But then the rest of the time, for the rest of the models, you're not likely to take them. And that's a complete variation on, say, something like Arcanist, where you're going to see 3-4 upgrades in every crew almost.
Yeah, or the leadline coat or sock.
Leadline sock.
Where you're going to see that potentially it could add value on any model in the faction. I don't know, Herman, do you agree on leadline?
So it's interesting. We were having this debate on leadline kind of over the last couple of weeks, and I would say that it's actually indicative of internal faction balance, where I don't think Guild has a upgrade problem. I think they have a minion problem. Like, everyone's like, oh, you take lead-like coat all the time. I'm not taking it on minions. People don't even know that it gives shielded 2 for hunker down on minions. And then you kind of extend that into no prisoners. You can extend that into expert marksman, where no prisoners has, I think it's called catch 'em, where you teleport a model 8 inches. You're never going to see that. People are taking it for, their enforcers, for their henchmen, for their masters, for those top two. And so I think that's where you start to see this intersection between upgrade balance and internal faction balance.
I think that gets back to the problem being the capabilities that some of these top tier upgrades give, is that they're handing out these very, very powerful, always on abilities that just dramatically increase the utility. I almost said upgrade the utility of those models or the survivability of those models. 12 cups of coffee from Bayou. Passing out no bonus actions within 4 to anything is a huge boon that you can put on literally any model in the crew. Magical training, train ninja, giving stealth out to just your master, to giving your stealth out to any random model, insane, just straight up insane. And you now have to consider these capabilities being put on any model that's out there, and you're going to get a really weird constraint in your design when you have to deal with the fact that they potentially are just making everything more resilient. In Guild, any living model can have armor 1. And that is a big thing you have to look at whenever you're designing new models, when you're thinking about interactions, whenever you're testing new stuff. You always have to have the specter in the back of your mind that, hey, this model could just be more resilient. For 2 stones, you could just make it more resilient.
So if we consider all the upgrades across all the factions, is there an upgrade that you all, or multiple upgrades that you all think are a great example of what an upgrade should be?
Yeah, I've got one. And oddly enough, I'm going to go with Explorers Society on this one. I actually, and some people argue with me on this one, but Flush with Cash, it's very situational. The whole, I can cancel your attack, but I lose a soul stone and give you a soul stone in return for it. In some cases, it will win you the game. New players will bring it in and consider it complete garbage because you're just handing over a soul stone to somebody else. But that soul stone can be used for prevention of damage. That soul stone can be used for a wide variety of different things. So you've given your opponent something in exchange for this issue that you've given. And I think that's a very balanced mechanic of, I am canceling something that you did, but in return for it, you're getting a slight bonus back in return. But I'm only going to do this in a situation where it's advantageous to me. So I think that's a pretty good example.
Yes, if I was going to say that there was one that I thought was just exceptionally well designed, it would be the Whisper from Rezzers. Because there are 2 things you sort of have to look at when you're thinking about an upgrade. Is it worth 2 stones? And is it too good for being 2 stones? Does it have too broad sweeping implications? Does it make things too powerful for that cost? And the Whisper, in my opinion, 100% worth 2 stones. You're getting some excellent utility. You're really playing into the Rezzers theme. I think Intuition makes Resurrectionist Summoners some of the more reliable in the game because you never have to worry about accidentally black jokering. But the flip side is that while it's great and has some awesome effects, I don't think it fundamentally alters how a model plays, and it doesn't fundamentally alter the faction balance. You're not making a model that's too resilient. The Intuition, it's only 3 cards, so even if you're using it on a beater, the effects on your attacks are going to be there, but not overwhelming. It's not an always-on effect as a result. So I think it rides the line of being definitely worth the cost and having strong utility, but also not disrupting faction balance and really creating a design constraint that I feel some of these other ones do.
Yeah, I have to agree on the Whisper. I think, actually, whilst being probably one of the better upgrades in the game, I think you hit the nail on the head there by saying what it does do is better enable a model to do, you take it as sort of a safety precaution a lot of the time, right? To ensure you can do what you were trying to do or what your model's designed to do. But to go back to your initial question, actually, this is a bit of a weird one because I don't think you see it as much, but I think Eldritch Magic from Neverborn is where I think upgrades should sit. It's got a small passive buff, which is useful, but not overpowered, doesn't massively make a model ridiculously good. It's got something that you can take, like Dispel Magic, which is cool. I've declared this master. I don't have any condition removal, and my opponent's bringing, I don't know, Keris or something like that. Cool, brilliant. I'm going to bring this. It's going to give me that condition removal. So it's situational. It's got a small buff. It's got a situational thing that you can bring in to fill a gap in a keyword that you need to fill that isn't actually necessarily in every keyword, rather than taking Serena, which I know is obviously the obvious choice at the moment, right? But it's that is where I want to see an upgrade sit. It's situationally useful and worth taking when you need that piece of tech that's on it, rather than I'm going to take this every game because it is pure value.
So speaking of the counter pick there, I think that's a really interesting aspect of this, because there's several upgrades. I think it's what there's inferiority complex in Bayou, the killer instinct in Razzers, and the Eldritch Magic, not Eldritch Magic. There's one other one that all give Ruthless to a model. That definitely feels like a tech pick of, my opponent has declared a terrifying or manipulative heavy keyword. Let me pull in some Ruthless. Do you all think that Ruthless is like that's okay, or too strong of a tech piece to just pull in, or just in the right place? Like, where do you all stand on the Ruthless add-in? Jeff?
So anyone that has ever played Ophelia versus Jackdaw will know exactly what I'm talking about. I would say that upgrade would normally fall into the right place category, with the exception of weird designed certain crews where their only defensive mechanic is terrifying or manipulative. And when you can bring in Ophelia against Jackdaw and then give your master Ruthless, you are guaranteeing that Ophelia will be able to kill Jackdaw in one activation without any problems whatsoever. That is an issue that kind of does need to be addressed. I think that you're going in the right direction of giving utility to your models when you give them an upgrade, but I think a utility piece of Ruthless where you get to cancel out, just blanket canceling out an entire crew's defense is not a good idea. Giving something like armor piercing where you have to flip a tome, I think that's a great idea, because you can situationally, you'll use the card to get around something, but just blanket ignoring it, I don't think that's a good way to go.
I think there's two ways of looking at that, right? Because it's you're completely right, and when you're the Jackdaw player, it's a bit of a feel bad. And Ophelia is a pretty special example about what can happen with that. But at the same time, actually, if you look at the amount of models, so if you compare those the factions, which is Rezzers and Bayou, right, that have Ruthless on upgrades. So the one of their 3 upgrades is only effective against a very small portion of the game, compared to something like Stealth or Swagger or Shielded or Counterspell or something like that, which is going to be a lot more broadly effective than Ruthless will be. So although it can be a feel bad in those situations when you are the player relying on Terrifying, I don't think in terms of a balance point of view it's necessarily too far ahead of the curve or in a bad place at all.
I think tech picks are one of the sweet spots for some upgrades. I don't think all upgrades should be tech picks. It shouldn't just be I take X versus Y and A versus B. That's a little too matchy and a little too boring. But having some tech picks, especially ones that synergize with the weaknesses of a specific faction, like Bayou and Rezzers with their low willpower on some of their models, on their minions, it's a good feature because it lends some complexity to your crew design. By the more you know about what you're going up against, the more you can plan for it, and your opponent has that exact same piece of knowledge, so that they might not tend to bring terrifying crews against resurrectionists and so forth. So having that in there, I think, is better than having just upgrades that provide top tier defensive abilities. I think in general, no upgrade should have top tier defensive abilities, but the like second string stuff like Ruthless, like Scamper as opposed to Butterfly Jump on Inhuman Reflexes, that level of stuff just seems like the perfect sweet spot for your tech pick upgrades and your mid-tier defensive feature upgrades.
I think in general, though, where Weird went wrong with some of these upgrades, and Trained Ninja is a great example. They tried to compound the upgrade, and it makes sense from their design perspective. Like, you're a trained ninja, you gain unimpeded stealth and from the shadows. But I think you are now adding too much to a model, like too much specialty onto a model, to where, like, if it was something like they gain stealth and, you know, another random thing, like when they cheat it, or if an opponent cheats against it, it takes 1 damage. Nobody would be like, oh, that's way too brokenly overpowered. But they're gaining 3 things that are all complementary to each other, and I think that's where you run into the large issues that we face with these upgrades.
I don't know. What do you think, Jamie?
Yeah, like they're all good points, and what it shows me a little bit is that everyone, or a lot of people, have a different opinion of where upgrades should sit, right? But the problem is we've got all those different variations in the game. But I totally sit with the tech pick point. Like, for me, an upgrade should fill a gap that you've got in your keyword or your faction that you might need sometimes, but is there as sort of a backup rather than I'm going to take this every time. That's where an upgrade should sit for me.
I just want to chime in that as a long-time RPG player who's gone through many iterations on many different games, fluff is never a justification for an overpowered ability. It's just not. Yes, sure, ninjas would be unimpeded and stealthy and from the shadows. That doesn't mean they should get those powers, because that's just a incredibly good set. And
they shouldn't also carry a Gatling gun, but carry on.
Those are samurai, not ninjas. That's a very different group. Though having your samurai that is also a trained ninja, I think that was a plot from the Batman the Animated Series episode.
How quickly you just reverted to fluff. Like, you just went straight fluff bunny there, buddy.
And I was going to bring this point up. I have always been really annoyed by this, that the Arcanists get magical training Soulstone cache, where they get all those awesome abilities with the Soulstone cache. But I'm like, hold on. The Arcanists have only been there for X amount of years inside Malifaux. The Neverborn have literally lived there for forever, since anyone can even remember. You don't think the Neverborn would have more Soulstones than the Arcanists? Like, it's where they're from. But, like, from a fluff standpoint, that never sat well with me. It just always bugged me.
I wouldn't call what they're doing their living.
We've uncovered new depths of the fluff. We'll have to do a future episode on
Depths
which
of
are
Malifaux.
Depths of Malifaux, our favorite fluff, and our least favorite fluff aspects in the game. But like, I wanna hone in a little more on the, like, okay, what are upgrades for? Because we've talked about tech picks in response to your opponent's crew. I think there's also an argument to be made for tech picks for the mission and potentially the table. Like, you may want to double down on an upgrade that makes you more mobile or makes you more defensive in particular combinations of strategies or schemes over others, which is not opponent specific, but a game specific tech. And I think that's okay. But are there other uses you all think upgrades should have in a perfect world? Jeff?
I actually think the largest thing an upgrade should be taken for is to fill gaps in your crew. As an example, like, if your crew primarily relies on manipulative or terrifying as a defensive mechanic, you should be allowed to have an upgrade where if somebody comes in with a ruthless model, maybe you took an upgrade to also give a model hard to wound or something else along that line, so that you can fill these small holes that you have. Maybe the Explorer Society, with their really low movement from some of their crews, should be able to get a +1 movement upgrade on some of their things. But that is an interesting design space, but it also needs to be balanced, because you don't want to have move 8 things walking around. So I haven't looked at all the possibilities, but I think that's what most upgrades should be used for.
Yeah, and I mean, I agree with you, Jeff, because I play a lot of journalists. They rely on that manipulative and everything. They should have an upgrade that gives them armor to help protect them.
So if we think about...
Hold on, I couldn't unmute. I got to respond to that one.
Oh, okay.
I agree that I think certain journalists should be able to be given armor. Maybe not being able to stack more on armor on top of other armor would be a great solution.
I can't imagine what you're talking about right there.
Who could that
model that could
possibly
stack
be?
armor on top of armor with take the hit, that would just be bullshit. No model would be allowed to do that. That's madness.
I mean, what are they doing? Is she wearing a Kevlar vest and then she decides to put on full plate on top of it so that she's as armored as a machine? I mean, that's why we've named it the lead-line sock, because we're not exactly sure where this armor is going on her body. But
you named it the lead-line sock because I was armoring up a sandworm, and you just didn't like that.
Yeah, it's got to wear the sock.
Something with rules.
Yeah. So, all right. So we've talked about...
Hold on, to clarify so that people don't get... you can't put lead-line sock on a sandworm.
So the last question I wanted to ask you all for this segment was the upgrade I mentioned at the beginning. It's a global upgrade that every faction has access to, and that is the Fated upgrade, where you can pay to have your effigy turn into an emissary halfway through the game. So you basically get an emissary for slightly cheaper, but you get it halfway through the game and it comes in with slightly less health. Do you all like that, dislike that? Have you ever taken it? What do you all think? Let's go, Jeff.
Personally, I think it isn't needed in the game. It created some very interesting design space that they had to work around. If your emissary is really good and you're going to do this, all you're doing is saving yourself some soul stones in the beginning. If your emissary is crap, you're never going to take it. So I think it wasn't a needed upgrade, and it was just kind of a way of showing the transition. I think it was more of a fluff thing than anything. So that's just my take on them. I don't think it was really needed in the game.
Josh, what do you think?
I think it's pretty cool, and I think the culmination of the potential for this is really highlighted in the Explorer Society one. Some of the other faction emissaries, they do different things that you don't necessarily want to transition to between throughout the game, but the Explorer Emissary really has a early game and late game one that I think are both solid pieces that contribute in different fashions, and having that ability to transition halfway through the game is a really nice feature.
This is it's a really interesting one, actually. So in theory, right, it should be the most balanced upgrade in the game because everyone has access to it. But it's very driven by, as you were saying, the emissary that goes on. Like the Outcast emissary, for example, the ability to put upgrades and stuff out you super want at the beginning of the game.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. I mean, as an Outcast player, I hire the emissary into a lot of crews. I have actually used the upgrade, I think probably only one time. And it was, I forget the list, but I was trying to squeeze in one other out of keyword model. So the savings of stones was the only way that it would work. But yeah, I agree. It's really dependent on the quality of those models. I don't know, Herman, how about you?
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's kind of like, what's the effigy bringing early? Because like, if you look at the mysterious one, it has that lure, so you can walk up, you can lure a model up, you get a little bit extra positioning for cheap. Then you also have that accomplice, and I really look for that accomplice there, so I'm kind of getting that 1-2 punch. If I'm using it on like Nekama, then she's moving up. All of a sudden, that threat range is way bigger than you expect it. And then he can grow up into something that's a lot tankier later on in the game and stick around. But if I look at like the brutal effigy, that's where I'm like, I don't really know what the brutal effigy is doing for me. Whereas the brutal emissary, he's more of a beater and he has crowd control and a few other things.
Yeah, and for resurrectionists, the emissary and effigy just do very different things, and there's not a good transition point between the two. Like, if you want the healing from the brutal or from the carrion effigy, you probably are going to want that healing throughout the entirety of the game. If you're looking for the terrain and the mindless zombies and the range damage, then you're probably going to want those throughout the entirety of the game. So transitioning between the two, I never really found that to be the way I want to do it. I want 2 turns of the effigy followed by 3 turns of the emissary. It's just not how it ends up shaking out for me.
Fair enough. Jeff?
I don't, just to piggyback with Josh, I don't think I have ever seen the carrion effigy in a game in 3rd edition. You see the emissary a lot. I'm not sure I've ever seen the effigy like in any tournament setting or anything like that. So it's kind of usually if you want the healing, you're going to take a regeneration, or it's not like resurrection is to lack for healing. So it's an interesting point Josh made.
All right, well, there we have it. So we're going to go to a quick break, and when we get back, we are going to talk about some ideas for how upgrades could be different in the future. So stick with us, and we'll be right back. All right, welcome back. So in this next segment, we're going to talk a little bit about future ideas for the upgrades. Now, we don't have any crystal ball, and we aren't in charge of designing the game, but we do love to speculate on, if we were king for a day, what are some things we could do to change up how upgrades play out. So I want to start with really the heart of the original hot take that kicked off this episode, which was, what if there were no upgrades? I think realistically, there's no way that Weird would ever just remove upgrades. Like, not going to happen. But tournament organizers could run a tournament format where they say, in this tournament, there are no generic faction upgrades. Well, I guess the question to you all is, one, would that be a format that you would like to try? And 2, if we did that, how do you think it would mix up the faction balance? Jamie, as our take originator, what do you think?
So I don't think it would be better for a lot of crews, a lot of factions, and I generally don't think it'd be better for the game to have no upgrades. But would it be more balanced? Possibly. Certainly at the top end, yes. I think the bottom end would struggle more with, and I use those terms quite loosely because I don't think there's a huge gap. But I think the factions with like the factions with the worst upgrades won't feel as bad playing in a format like that. But actually, there are some crews that heavily rely on an upgrade to do something or fill a gap or something like that would feel quite bad about it. But I've sort of rambled a little bit there. But yeah, I think ultimately the game would probably be more balanced overall, because I think the gap between the power level of the upgrades is too big. But I don't think it would be good for the game for them to disappear, but like for the flavor and for the opportunity to tech pick for those upgrades that are better balanced.
The top end stuff would definitely suffer, because you're removing things that have sort of become the meta choices. Like, you're always going to pick up a minion with magical training and Arcanists because Arcane Reservoir is just stonking great. But most factions would not suffer greatly in this. You would be limited on your tech picks. I think there are specific masters that would definitely suffer as a result. Anyone playing in, like, Rezzers playing into Pandora. Rezzers playing into Jackdaw would suffer because they can no longer reliably get Ruthless. But those are kind of master specific. If you take the high willpower Resurrectionist crews, you go your elite Von Stuck crew, and you're not going to have as much of a trouble as your bells would, or as your flesh constructs would. That's a bad example. They have Ruthless.
So my personal opinion is the crews, I don't know if they were designed this way, but they shouldn't have been designed with the idea of upgrades being factored into their crew. And I'm sorry, but like if you lose your Arcane Reservoir, maybe you have to go out and figure out how to get card draw from something else. Maybe you have to bring in other models that aren't picked as often. I don't know that there are any Ruthless models. I think there are within within Resurrectionists, but maybe you have to go outside keyword just like everybody else has to figure out ways to get around and do your tech picks. So I don't think it's a bad tournament format, and it would definitely be interesting, but it would definitely be something you'd need to let the community know about ahead of time so that they could plan for it.
I tell you one thing that would happen from that, and anyone that was part of the open beta for M3E will remember this if they followed this forum closely, is we'd have to be very prepared for the endless tiers of the Arcanist players. There was a brief period during the open beta where they didn't have Arcane Reservoir, and you've never seen so much salt in your life. The poor Arcanist players, they can't cope without 7 cards. They legitimately just fall apart and don't know what to do with themselves.
That is true. Josh?
I mean, inside the delicious Arcanist tiers, there is a nugget of fundamental truth in that these are the things that these crews were designed to have in mind. Like, some of these crews don't have necessarily a tech pick model because they didn't need that. Or, like, things like Leadline Coat. Leadline Coat, you had to take it into consideration when you were balancing these models in a general sense. So they've all had that, at least in the back of their mind when they were designing these things. So taking them away would change a lot. But again, I think it would come down to a master-specific thing. But I will reiterate Jamie's point that Arcanists would be just the saltiest about all of this.
So, yeah, I mean, as far as the format goes, I'd play it. That's fine. I don't have strong opinions. But I did want to play a slight devil's advocate question then, is that if you all are talking about how Leadline Coat has been a design factor with Guild's faction design, or was it Butterfly Jump and Neverborn's faction design, what happens when you change that? You say, okay, this is a problem. This has been taken too much. It's so bad for the game. We need to do it. What is the impact then of changing something that everything else in that faction has been designed around?
Well, you'd have to do it in a fashion similar to what was done with Inhuman Reflexes, where they took away Butterfly Jump, but they put in something that occupied the same space. Scamper is different than Butterfly Jump, but still does something similar. And in some cases, it can have some more utility depending on exact positioning, but it's not the same ubiquitous, always-on defensive feature. You get a toned-down version of your Leadline Sock, and you would get the same, you get defensive measures, but not the always-on Armor 1 laugh-off level of shenanigans that they currently have.
I think the large portion of basically what Weird needs to look at with these upgrades is when I play Explorer Society, I don't look at an upgrade and say, that is needed. I can't function without this. When I look at Neverborn after Inhuman Reflexes was changed, nothing in there is something that I immediately go, okay, I'm making my crew. First I make my master, now I'm going to attach upgrades and make sure that I reserve 4 soul stones for upgrades. That's just not something that should be. When I play Resurrectionists, I know I'm immediately going to attach the Whisper on several masters. When I play Arcanists, I know that Arcane Reservoir upgrade is going to be attached somewhere in my crew. When you play Guild, you know that you're going to be taking the Leadline Sock on at least one of your models, maybe two, for added protection. So I think the upgrades that are, I plan my crew around this upgrade as opposed to I'm doing it as a tech pick, definitely need some attention. And there's an errata coming. Hopefully some of them get a slight look.
So before we started recording, Jamie was actually talking about, I think, potentially a really cool idea to address some of these, because we've all name dropped specific individual upgrades. So I don't know, Jamie, do you want to tell the listeners what your thought was on ways to address that?
Yeah, so there's two potential ideas. So there's one that is just better from a strictly balanced point of view, which I don't know whether it's certainly not better from a fluff point of view, but better from a balance point of view would be potentially global upgrades, so rulebook upgrades rather than faction-specific upgrades. And they could probably just generally be a tech pick. You could have one soulstone, get unimpeded, cool. So you come on that board with loads of severe terrain, but you really want to use this keyword because it's good for the game. You could get the unimpeded upgrade on a couple of key models. The other idea, which I think would just generally be better, would be rotating upgrades in and out. Maybe one at a time, maybe the whole set once every however long. But I think it would give the opportunity for them to stay fresh. It would give the opportunity for them to mix up the abilities that go into the factions. And I think it's really, really challenging. If you think about having 3 different abilities or actions across 3 different upgrades across all the factions that have enough variation to give flavor to them, I think it's really hard to have that many different things at a similar balance level.
So I actually really like this idea that Jamie's proposed, and they don't have to be mutually exclusive. An upgrade that just came to mind is something like, if your model does not have armor, incorporeal, or hard to wound, it gains armor 1, something so that you can't stack on, but it can give a little bit of utility to a model that maybe needs it. But, these generic upgrades can be introduced with a gaining grounds, where these are the generic upgrades that come in with gaining grounds, but we'd still need to address the existing upgrades that are out there currently.
Josh?
I'm going to do that thing that I said for people not to do earlier on, and be like, generic upgrades, even if they were easier to balance, they're just not very Malifaux. Even if we look at the other side, which does have a generic set of upgrades, their upgrades are still more bespoke than just adding this one ability. They are all still doing something weird and unique. And as soon as you go down to the weird and unique path, which is just exceedingly Malifaux, you're going to run into problems when you start applying it to literally hundreds of models. It's that same issue that you run into with something like Leadline Coat. You now have to consider Leadline Coat, or any of these upgrades, on every model within a faction. Is there one that's going to be problematic on? Possibly. Is that going to get caught in playtesting? Almost certainly not. It's not going to get caught until it's out in the wild. This fact has been demonstrated in multiple games that I've seen over the years. It's because within a beta playtest, there's just a much smaller meta than it is when you consider the whole world. So even if you think it's going to be more balanced, there's still a high likelihood you're going to miss something. And now you're missing something across all models and all factions, as opposed to at least focusing it in on one single faction.
So what about, that actually just sparked an idea of, what if there was, as part of a gaining grounds, some strategy-specific upgrades, or a strategy that interacted with upgrades that you gave to models? What do y'all think about how interesting that would be, Herman?
I actually think that plays to one of the core strengths of Malifaux and of why we play it, is that you have these gaining grounds, you have not just schemes and strategies and situations and scenarios that we're trying to score, but literally you have models with rules that, drop scheme markers, interact with scheme markers. And so I think that having a upgrade that kind of interacts in a strategy sense, maybe not direct scoring, but something that kind of works in that way, plays to the strengths of the game.
Yeah, and there was a strategy in M2E that if you had to have a model or two models with upgrades.
Oh no, sorry. Let me clarify, because you may be thinking of Show of Force, where you needed models with upgrades in the middle. I meant like where the strategy said, and we kind of do this right now, like the lodestone basically says, attach an upgrade, this model can't be placed. It gains an ability, nearby models can move the lodestone. Like, what if the strategy actually gave some upgrades that you placed on one or more models that said, when this strategy is in play, this upgrade happens and it can modify models' abilities? Jamie?
Okay, so I've gone down a slightly different path, but what you were talking about there, no, okay, I've instantly, while I'm thinking this very thought, I've already decided it's a bad idea.
I don't disagree, but that's hilarious.
Yeah, because what it is like a complete win more. But actually, you could go the other way, which would make more sense. But because where you're saying, the strategy gives you an upgrade. I was thinking, but how cool would it be if you unlocked upgrades by scoring points? And like that would be a really interesting way to do it. And then I was just like, no, because actually, if you're winning, you're just getting better and better and better. So what about if you were losing and you unlocked upgrades by losing, if you dropped down points, you could unlock upgrades like that. And I went down a rabbit hole. And what I did was started talking before I'd finished thinking about it. And like I sort of got to the point, I started talking, I was like, this is a terrible idea. And then I was like, well, actually, we could do it like this. But yeah, so I'm not sure. I don't actually think that the strat giving you an upgrade really changes anything. Like,
you've
it's
invented the blue shell.
Yeah, it's basically the lodestone now, but as an upgrade instead of a make-believe lodestone. I'm not sure how that actually interacts with upgrades, but you could do something like about unlocking upgrades, I guess, with that, or you could do, I don't know. I really, there's so many different ways you could do it.
I got you there, Jamie. How about you start something, maybe two of them, so that you're not all fighting in the middle of the board, but there are two cursed objects on the board, and when you pick up the cursed object, you get an upgrade that reduces your movement by 2, and you lose all defensive mechanisms, and you score points by having it on your side of the board, or even in your deployment zone, but it's really hard to get your guy there, and you become a whole lot easier to kill because you're carrying a cursed object.
Wasn't that just cursed objects back in the day?
Shut your face.
No, it was a condition that was placed on your model, I think. That had no effect.
Yeah, back
other
when
than
conditions
scoring.
were ubiquitous, and I thought there was one that made you worse off, at least slower. Maybe I'm crazy. It's possible I'm crazy. Supply wagons.
Jamie?
So I think we used to have this in the game. I can't really remember an M2E. What about if you could, it could even be a generic, a general action, but it would have to be really, really. It would need to be not too easy to do. What about if you could knock upgrades off enemy models? Would that make it more balanced? So if you take a really good, game impacting one, you're taking that in the knowledge that it's going to be a target for your opponent. But actually, if you're taking one that's just a little bit of a tech pick or a little bit useful, not too broken, people might not bother wasting AP trying to get rid of it.
Hans.
Yeah. M2E had that, and people wept at just the concept, the idea that he could, plink or ping off an upgrade or something like that.
Was it Arcanist players?
I think it was just people in general. Even though I never actually saw it go off, or maybe once in the entire time that I played M2E, it was one of those. The weeping and the gnashing of teeth over the existence of this ability, I think, would dissuade Weird from ever putting that back in the game. I
mean, it's a fun factor. Someone pays something for an ability, and you're knocking it off of them.
You know what people don't like? Hostile work environment.
Maybe we don't put it on a model that can give himself 24-inch range. Well, just a thought.
Just remember though. So I've used that ability in second edition. on Hans, and it was often devastatingly effective. But the key was the target for it was frequently the like model specific upgrades, like because it wasn't just knock a generic model off or upgrade off. It was like knock any upgrade off, which one just the upgrade environment is different. But I think that it would be really problematic because you could like shoot Jan Lo's Ascension upgrade off, which would be super weird. Jamie?
Yeah, the effect of it is just so uneven because they do use upgrades for a variety of things. In addition to the ones you purchased, you also have the summon upgrades. You also have the master specific upgrades for that certain subset of masters that does that sort of thing.
But you could make it generic upgrades only.
That's true.
Like if we look at it in a more objective way, so aside from, and I'm going to use this example again because they deserve it, aside from Arcanist players getting salty about losing Arcane Reservoir by it being knocked off by a model, if we look at it in a more objective way, you're saying, oh, people get really annoyed about hiring this for a specific purpose and then it being removed. Well, how is that different to you hiring a model for a purpose in the game and your opponent killing it? Like, is it really that big of a stretch from there?
I actually love the way the hole that Jamie just went down. If you get a 2 Soulstone upgrade knocked off of a model in M3E and it devastates your game plan, that is a problem upgrade in this game. If you spent 2 Soulstones that completely altered how you play, that's not good. Just like, a 2 Soulstones is a Malifaux rat. If I kill a Malifaux rat in a crew, it should not alter the way that you play in any significant way. And I'm sorry, but what he just described, if you get Arcane Reservoir knocked off of one of your models and it completely devastates you, that's not good.
It's the red magic versus blue magic distinction. People tend to be a lot less salty when they just outright kill a model than when they prevent you from doing that thing that you wanted to do.
Yeah, that's a good point.
You see it all, like I see it from you guys when I have a hostile work environment up. Like depriving someone of the ability to do that thing that they paid for just makes people very angry. Just incensed when they can't do it. I'm not saying it's justifiable. I'm not saying that is a good or bad thing, but it's a thing that is true. So
you're depriving them of every ability.
Yeah, there's a difference between I'm taking away something that you can do and I'm taking away everything that you can do.
I will note the salt right now.
Yeah, I'm not a big fan of hostile work environment. As the listeners know, I'm a big fan of like obey type crews, and I'm also a fan of summoning. And hostile work environment is like a big middle finger to both of those. I'm sorry.
But if we want to transition into the spiciest upgrade in this day and age, Will of Cadmus. There is a lot of consternation over Cadmus and Nexus lately, and I think Jeff has been playing quite a bit of Nexus, and we in turn have played against him a bunch. I wanted to see what people thought about what it feels like to play against Cadmus, and whether or not you think there are like fundamental underlying issues, or if it's something that just would take some more experience and more figuring out of how to deal with the mastering crew. Jeff, the Cadmus aficionado, what do you think about that?
So, if go back and have a listen to our Cadmus podcast, we cover him pretty in depth. But in the podcast, I had said right off the bat, this is not a crew that when you first play with it or play against it, you are going to understand and do well against. This crew is hard to handle and maneuver. It is also hard to play against with somebody that has a good understanding of the Cadmus crew. And I think Herman made a comment before, and I actually like the comment. Every game of Malifaux, doesn't matter how many games that you've played, every game of Malifaux is a brand new game. So when you go into this game particularly if it's a master that you've never played against, you need to really understand what you're playing against. Cadmus does have some glaring weaknesses that it has. Now, there are other models that are being taken, such as the Emissary, that help to cover up some of those weaknesses, but those weaknesses are there. And as Josh, Herman, Owen, and probably Jamie are going to attest over the next couple of minutes, Cadmus is beatable. You just have to play around their mechanic.
Yeah, I 100% agree on that. And speaking as someone who got utterly stomped by Cadmus the first time I played it, and it's easy for me to say, oh, just learn to play, right? That's not what I'm trying to say. But like, it is definitely one where you're going to lose probably the first 2 or 3 times you play against it. And so the key is just practice, right? Like it is beatable. You just need to apply the right techniques to try to avoid it. But I don't know, Jamie, have you been playing Nexus in the UK League?
I actually played Nexus today in the UK League, yeah. I really like Nexus. I really enjoy playing with Nexus, and I really enjoy playing against Nexus. And I completely agree with what's been said already. Like, there's this online vendetta against Nexus at the moment from some salty people. But you know what? It's a really cool crew. It's a really cool theme. It does have some glaring weaknesses, and you know what? Yes, you can take some models to try and overcome them. But is that any different to what we do in any other crew in the game? I don't see that it is. But yeah, I mean, so to go back to what we said right at the beginning when you were asking what a Panto Villain is, I mean, what you were just about to say, where you say just play better, that is exactly the Panto Villain stuff to say. So if I was to give an idea as the Panto Villain, it would be just play better, chumps.
Unfortunately, that is not the most useful advice. And I'm not going to stop it off at just play better. Honestly, against Nexus, the answer is to play against Nexus more. Like, or even play with Nexus more to give you a better insight into how the crew functions and how to deal with it. I've seen it from both sides, and like fielding Nexus, trying it out, gives you a lot of insight into how both the crew works and how you can take it apart. So that would be a definite recommendation I would have to anyone who is having issues with Nexus, would be to play it, to actually put the crew on the table and see how it goes.
Yeah, and I mean, I'll say that playing against it, and I mean, maybe Jeff is just catfishing me by playing poorly, but playing against it has been really eye-opening, because I had games where I was absolutely dominating him, like the little puppy dog that he is. But then I had another game where I made a single mistake before the game had even kicked off. I was playing Bass against Nexus, and Bass has the ability to deploy further up the table. So I was trying to keep it so that way I was outside of the melee range of where he could place the husks. And I just screwed up where Bass placed, and he was able to drop a husk like straight up in melee with Bass. He got that parasite token. I had a bad hand. He had a good hand. He got the token on him turn 1, and things went very poorly for Bass. So it was a case of like, you feel bad and it feels really strong because a tiny mistake before anything got kicked off, before cards happened, had a big impact. It had a large cost. Flip side is that the next time I'm going to hopefully be smarter and try. And then like even on like the guild Facebook page, we were kind of spitballing a bunch of different ideas, a bunch of different tech takes that you can take. If you're worried about Will of Cadmus, you can take the Emissary with crowd control, and he can stop those actions. You can start to prey a lot on their low willpower through models like Alan Reed, where he puts up that target number duel that they got to take. So every time they got to take an action, you're trying to take this TN duel, and if your willpower is 3, then you need a 7 every single time before you even get to start flipping cards. So there's a lot of little itty bitty things that you can start working on as you start getting kind of that experience. But it takes time, it takes games, and if you're like me, I play like 1 game a week. That takes me several months to even play multiple games against Cadmus.
So First of all, here's a pro tip to everybody out there. Do not get a parasite token on your master turn 1. You're probably going to lose that game. It's not a good idea. But to put that ability into perspective with the parasite tokens, when you get a parasite token, you have effectively been given these. Now, keep in mind, aside from a couple of models with Arcane Reservoir, the Cadmus crew does not have very many defensive abilities. They rely on the parasite token to grant them that. And the parasite token is the equivalent of having incorporeal and a melee version of vengeance. It is no different than Karai with extra hoops that you have to jump through. So the complaining about that is it's a little much. But I have found in my mini games that I've played with Cadmus, ranged crews give Cadmus a huge problem. And terrifying is literally terrifying to the Cadmus player. Those shambling nests that people are so afraid of can do almost nothing to things that are terrifying, because not only are you trying to pass terrifying checks with an incredibly low willpower, now you're hitting at a stat of 4 after you do it. It's a huge card sink and not worth the time. So there's a lot of counterplay when you're playing against Nexus. Just keep going, try out different things, figure out what works. Also, Anna Lovelace is a pain in the butt.
Yeah, like, jokes aside about just playing better, like, you guys have come up with some, like, really, really good counters there. And, like, it is, like, I think it's one of those keywords where, like, I get the feel bad, so I can sort of understand the salt to a degree. Like, I can get how if you get caught in it, it's going to feel bad. But, like, I think something like Jackdaw is going to do exactly the same thing, right? If you get caught in that web that he's trying to put out and in that situation that he wants you to be in, it's going to be a feel bad situation. But I think Cadmus is really, really obvious just looking at the cards, what the weaknesses are. They've got the low stats on the move, on the willpower, on some of their models. They like to be close together. There's some really, really obvious counters that a lot of factions have access to bring to the table to deal with them. And then aside from that, it's a big part of it is going to be learning what they will do to you. Like, you need to know what they can do to know how to beat it.
First of all, Jeff, I can't believe you brought my girl into this. Don't leave Karai out of this mess. She's precious and vulnerable. But second, knowing, I think on the Explorers, knowing what your opponent can do with them is extremely important. The Explorer Masters are pretty much across the board complicated. They do a lot of stuff, and if you aren't expecting that, then you're going to get caught by surprise. And that's very true for that entire keyword, or that entire faction. So definitely do some research. I know everyone loves homework, but you want to be Explorer Society? Do your homework.
So along that same, I was playing a game against Herman. I don't remember what crew he was taking, but he shot my shambling nest and gave it staggered. And I'm sorry, but when you're walking around with a move of 1, he's not really all that scary. Like, take advantage of their weaknesses. Like, if you take anything that targets willpower or targets movement, like, it's almost auto hits against them. The other thing that I'd like to point out is if you avoid the parasite tokens, which is doable, their damage tracks are all really, really low. Like, if you just look at Cadmus himself, if you get into melee, Nexus, when you get into melee with Nexus, he can potentially do a minimum of 4, potentially 5 damage in melee. If you don't have a parasite token, they can do 1, 3, 4 damage a turn to you once. Because you can't go through the same model more than once. Like, if you're running into a big melee in the middle and deciding that you're going to win that fight, I'm sorry, you're not going to win that fight. It's
2, 4, 5 min because of Siphon Power and Drain Life Trigger.
Well, that's if Cadmus is hurting themselves for it. But once again, from a master 245, that's what, one gunshot from most other masters. It's not that scary. It's not really something that you need to hugely worry about. It's when you're clumped up and they're passing off damage to everybody is when things start to get really concerning for you. I mean, don't clump up, spread out. These are fairly simple things. If you had a model in the middle of the board that had a hazardous aura that did 1 damage to you every time you took an action, are you really going to run everybody into that middle of the board? It just yes. Some people are playing against Cadmus and making silly decisions and then blaming it on Cadmus. And I'd like to see some of get a little more games in and figure it out.
I was just going to add that it was the clockwork traps. So you deployed your nests, and then I just deployed the traps, engaging them.
Yeah, it worked out with that's right. That's what it was. And honestly, traps for a 2 soulstone model, it targets movement, and you're stuck in melee with them. And honestly, they were just kind of stuck where they were. But if Herman wouldn't have made the mistake of getting a parasite token on Bass turn 1, that probably would have been a game that I lost, because after the shambling nests are removed, the reliably getting parasite tokens gets a lot harder.
All right. Well, I think we're going to wrap it there. And I know it's fairly late over in the UK, so we'll let Jamie get on with his night/bed. But I just want to thank you so much for coming on the show. It's been awesome. Love to have you back sometime.
No worries, man. Thanks for having me.
And
you want to plug Jamie's podcast? If you have a chance, go over and check out the Flipping Weirds podcast. Bunch of great guys. I've listened to it a couple of times, so go give them a listen.
If you're in search of more Explorer Society content, I believe all the most recent episodes of their podcast go deep. And I'll also put in a plug for checking out the UK Super League. So there's weekly posts going up on the Weird Place Facebook group, and then I believe also some content on the Weird forums. The UK has really been doing an amazing job in pandemic times with vassal leagues, with keeping organized play going. So if you are in the US and aren't following any of the UK stuff going on, you should definitely check it out. There's a lot of interesting information coming out of the balance there. So definitely follow along and see how things are going. And with that, thank you for listening to another exciting episode of the Capital City Crew podcast. We will be back in your feed with awesome stuff soon. Take care.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of the Capital City Crew podcast. We hope you tune in next time.